Key to the Inside, a podcast by Khoury Johnson-Levitt. By interviewing leaders from all branches of government, our podcast will provide insight and an up-close perspective into state and national government.
Welcome to KJL's podcast, A Key to the Inside. Today, Ron Khoury and myself, Stephanie Johnson, are being joined by Jim Holcomb, the soon-to-be CEO and president of the Michigan Chamber, as well as John Walsh, who is the current CEO of the Michigan Manufacturers Association. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that these two gentlemen have a long history within state government and policy making. Jim used to be the chief of staff to a former Speaker of the House, and John was a serving member of the Michigan House for six years, and also served with Governor Snyder in the executive office. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation today, and we're pleased to have these two gentlemen join us.
No, thanks for having us. Looking forward to the talk.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you guys for coming. We appreciate it. We know you're busy. Given COVID, obviously your members are probably the ones that have had to scramble probably the most with this. So first question I want to throw out, with COVID pretty much in the rearview mirror at this point, what do you see as the biggest, most impactful adjustment your members are going to have to make to kind of keep profitability going forward and creativity going forward?
Well, I'll jump in. I think the biggest thing I'm hearing from our members, it's about talent, recruitment, and retention. Certainly the paradigm has changed a little bit between an employer and an employee and how you bring in people into your organization. And I think it's just really becoming a situation where employers are having to be creative. You have to be more flexible. You have to really listen to what your employees want. And certainly with the federal unemployment stimulus, it's making harder to attract talent right now. And people are going to have to get creative, and they really have to not only sell your organization, but it's about the culture, and it's about people wanting to collaborate on the product or service you're creating and selling.
And I would repeat on talent, it is key. It was a big deal for the industry beforehand, particularly for manufacturing before the COVID pandemic, but it has only been exacerbated. And Jim's right, there's a big impact from the federal unemployment kick that a lot of folks are taking. The governor has indicated that that will continue in Michigan through September 6th, that's when it ends. So we expect some relief there, but the other impact has been schools. Are they open, are they closed, is it a hybrid? And for a single parent or a two-parent household where they're both working, that's been a real difficult challenge for them to raise their child, help educate their child, and try to keep their job. So we're looking at schools coming back online in the fall. And that will help, and getting rid of that extra unemployment amount will also help. But making sure people know, for our members, that manufacturing is good wages, good benefits, and a good environment to work in is critical. And we can do better, frankly, as an industry. We can do better to let folks know that there are good jobs available and the conditions that people will work in. So talent's really a big deal. The other one, just quickly, that I would mention is the supply chain is going to be in some nature of change for the next couple of years. It won't be overnight, but what we realized were some weaknesses in the worldwide supply chain that might be addressed if we could do some more onshoring.
I think we're seeing, just by virtue of our conversation today, using the new technology platforms is changing it for, a lot of employers are able to provide the flexibility. I was talking with a large contractor the other day. He was bringing on a young woman in the architectural side of their business. She wants to live in Denver. You're located here in Michigan. She was the talent they wanted. They said, fine. They said, as long as you get on an airplane a couple times a year when we need you, you can do the job. And the technology is allowing that. So it's the creativity, I think, that employers are able to kind of utilize now to make sure they can get the talent they want. Because it's not only wages. You see, they want to feel the culture. They want to feel that they're making a difference. They want to have a say in the business. And you're going to have some good collaboration between employers and employees. I think it's going to make organizations stronger. And it's the flexibility. COVID certainly was a horrible situation for the entire country. But it's things like this, learning how. I can't believe I didn't know what Zoom was a year and a half ago. I'm on it 5 times a day. And so it's becoming part of our nature now, and I think it is helpful. I think people do want to get back in person. They want to have that interaction. They kind of crave that continuity of conversation, but the technology is going to make it a different situation for employers and employees.
So it sounds like you see post-COVID economy having a lot of changes made to it based on what we had to adapt to during COVID. So what other changes do you see that might be more permanent as we go forward that didn't really exist so much before the COVID pandemic hit?
I think to Jim's point, the technology is going to stay. The ability to communicate through Zoom or go to webinar or any of the other sources, it does help. The one thing that I would just mention, if we can go back for a second, on the production floor, our folks have to be there. And so the tension for manufacturers will be, do they bring back their HR staff? Do they bring back the finance staff? Those folks might want to engage in the new economy, for lack of a better description, and work from home. And that's going to take some time to sort out, where you're in a business that requires some of the employees to be on site and possibly others not because of their job category. So technology is here to stay. And we'll see more automation in manufacturing, but it won't be along the lines of the major job replacing automation that occurred for many years. It'll be more, how do you synchronize human and computer or digital technology? How do you put those two together for more productivity and stability moving forward?
I think the future is looking good for our economy, because I think one of the problems John pointed out earlier that we have to address is supply chain. We're going to have to bring more of that. We saw too many interrupting, from major chip manufacturing down to, can you get chicken wings at your restaurant? It just really impacted everybody across the board. And I think we're seeing that sometimes it's economically beneficial to outsource all over the world, and that's great because we can do it, but we need to make sure that we're protected, and we have the supply chains here to make sure we satisfying the needs of all of our citizens. And I think you'll see a big push there. I think it'll not only be from our elected leaders, but from our business leaders, and people are going to redesign their process. And I think the exciting part is too, there are going to be changes we have no idea what they are. Everybody's thinking differently now. We're going to have a different process. There'll be new products coming out. Look at how many job providers just pivoted on a dime, not only serve their customers, but to help with COVID. You had major manufacturers, who created new systems to build ventilators when we needed them. Everybody pitched in, and I think what we saw is that people are more flexible than what we sometimes believe, and I think job providers are going to lead that way, and we're going to have a whole new economy and new parts of it that we don't even envision yet.
Yeah, following up on that, I mean, we all know the saying, never let a good tragedy go to waste. And I think both of you kind of touched on, what we don't know and what we're about to learn about ourselves and how we kind of handle ourselves and go forward to stay relevant, whether it's a manufacturing plant or a typical business. With that, and given both of your long resumes within state government, what do you see as being needed to be done, whether it's through the executive department or executive office or the departments, or even legislatively, that would kind of smooth the path along for us to achieve those new nuances of doing and running our companies?
I think the way I look at it, first, people need to understand there's no silver bullet. There's a lot of problems out there and nothing's going to change immediately. Secondly, I focus more on the process side. I came up through the policy shops in the legislature and being a staffer, and I think we need to get back to the point of having a real debate and a real discussion. We've lost that ability, and this is a Republican and Democrat problem right now. We need more policy and less politics. Politics is always going to be part of the process, and that's fine, but it can't drive the process. And I think there are a lot of important conversations that we need to have that we don't anymore. Whether you call it the cancel culture or somebody just wants to get on Twitter and fire off a tweet, it's always, we're no longer the 24-hour news cycle, we're the 10-minute Twitter cycle. And that's just damaging to the process, because I think we really need to get down and dive into the problems that we see, face them head on, but get people working together. We need to demand from our elected leaders that they're working together. That's the one thing I would change that I hear from my members. They want people working together. They don't necessarily, everybody doesn't have to agree, and it's fine to disagree as long as you do it the right way and the conversation continues. When John was a legislator, he was great at that. You could hear a yes or no from him, but he would keep talking. He was always looking to solve the problem. And I think we're missing some of that now. Some of this is term limits, but some of this is just the politics from the federal government on down. And I worry that the public is pulling back, and that's not good for anybody. We need our citizens engaged to talk to their elected leaders, but we also need them to be part of the process.
And again, I agree, with Jim's assessment. And Jim, thank you for your comment. I always enjoyed working with Chamber in this role. I still do, and look forward to you and I moving forward with our groups. The noise is dramatic, and it's almost all politics. The problem is, if you're a business owner or you're a citizen just trying to make your way, the noise is so loud and conflicting, it's difficult to find a consistent policy that you can rely on. And so at a granular level, coming out of the pandemic, let's take a look at our regulatory structure, our tax structure, make sure it's appropriate, protects folks, but allows industry to move forward, be productive, provide jobs and income to everybody. But there's just so little room for people to have conversations because you're always wrong, or at least you're accused for being wrong because you have a different opinion. So it's, it really isn't so direct to the question. I think Jim and I are both identifying some major concerns that we have about business moving forward and being the job creators that it can be and should be here in Michigan. Other states, unfortunately, I think we have a national issue on our hand, but some other states are able to rise above the partisan politics and have a clarity of message for their citizens and for businesses that allow folks to think, I ought to be in Indiana, I ought to be in South Carolina. Maybe I should move to Florida. So, trying to find states where there is, trying to replicate where there's clarity of message will be critical to us moving forward. Now, all of that said, I'll tell you, we didn't always agree with the Whitmer administration, but we always were welcome at the table. And we often did agree, and we're very thankful for that. Continued openness to citizens, business owners, labor, whoever it may be, as long as there's still that dialogue, I have hope because people will still keep reacting. Politicians will react to their constituents. That's important.
Do you guys see a kind of a shift maybe then, again, one of the outcomes of COVID, that we can do more things not in the office? Do you see a shift coming from maybe not so many people engaging in the 4-year degree and moving on to a trade, given that there will be, we're talking a couple $1 billion infrastructure package coming up, college being expensive, and understanding that, we now have this technology where we do not need to be at a certain campus, and we can learn how to, whether it's run a crane operator or work on an elevator. Are you starting to see a shift, or maybe seeing a shift from university thought process to maybe back into the trades?
I certainly hope so. I'm seeing it personally in my own world with sons and daughters, family and friends, that people are seeing the trades. It's a great career. You have a good career path, and it's something where I think people have an antiquated notion of what a trade is. If you talk to a welder now, or plumbers and electricians all across the board, the creativity and the education that's needed, the training they get is just fantastic. And these are the people in those jobs, those men and women are building the communities around us that we need. Certainly infrastructure, as Ron, you mentioned, it's an area that's been ignored for far too long, and we have to address it. And we need those people in those jobs. Everybody is not suited for a 4-year degree, just like everybody is not suited to be an electrician. You have to find your path in life. And I think far too often we look down on people who are in trades. Governor Snyder graciously appointed me to one of his commissions. We run around the state talking to people about the future of the workforce. And far too many times we heard parents say, I just don't want my child going into trades. I don't want them to have that type of job. And it's a job that They just didn't understand what the modern scope of that work is and what the great life it provides kids.
I do see a reaction from community colleges and other technical and trade schools trying to step up their programming, looking for ways to invest in their equipment and faculty to make courses available to a rising demand from our consumer. Not so much from the universities, and what I do worry about is the chorus that you have to have a baccalaureate degree or you can't proceed. It's growing loud again. It's ebbed and flowed over the last 10, 15 years, and it's starting to come back. I won't dismiss anyone's academic pursuit, whatever it may be. They need to find their balance and their future. From a counseling standpoint, from a societal standpoint, I think we have to make sure that folks that want to be in the trades feel proud about being in the trades. It's a good living. The other biggest trend in education, as I read about it, it's a lifelong endeavor now. When I graduated from high school, I went on to college, I went on to law school, and for all intents and purposes, I'm done with my education. My on-the-job training, of course. But when you look at our economy today, to progress through almost any job, it requires additional training. And so we need our colleges and universities to be more adaptable to that reality. That mixture of students that might be 18 years old, there for a full 15 credits, but they might be joined by a 50-year-old who's there for a couple of credits so that they can move up at their office. It's a big adjustment, but one we're going to have to make if we want to be truly successful in Michigan. Addressing our education and our workforce development will be key to that, I think, beyond any other tool available to us.
I was just going to say, what I hear from my members is it's those jobs in the trades that they're missing. It's what's keeping them back from growing, that there are so many open positions across the state, and John's right, the community colleges are feeling a great need. They're working closely with employers, just as the unions are. I think people would be surprised to understand, we talked earlier about just the dynamics of the political discourse we have. How many times the chamber is working with unions now, trying to make sure we have good policy. That works together and that moves everybody forward, and it's been one of the great changes I've seen over the last 10 years. I think labor and management are more focused working together. They aren't going to agree on everything, and there's no reason they should. But on the areas they do agree, there's an understanding that if they work together, we can have positive change. And I think we're going to see that. And I think it's going to help the trades across the state, because my members need those people to help build the infrastructure, and the trades are providing good jobs. And it's just a win-win situation when everybody works together down that path.
So speaking of that, what kind of policy or regulations, laws could the state be pursuing that would help in this area, help with not just the trades, but manufacturing side as well, as far as getting more employees out there in the employment pool and training, etc. We all know that there's things that are happening in the there's been some programs put into place, but are they working, and how can they be enhanced more?
Yeah, we've been very pleased with things like Reconnect and Going Pro. The Futures for Frontliners, they all focus on people entering or those that are in the workforce that need to skill up to stay in it. So additional funding, maybe tweaking of those programs, as the economy changes or as we look forward to what the needs are and meeting those. A couple of things I think from a public policy standpoint that we could do is additional counseling available in high schools. And I'm talking about career counseling. Our counselors are overwhelmed as it is on an academic basis. The last time I heard a number was something like 600 students to one counselor in high school on average across the state, larger districts, of course. But if we could have career counselors that could help students at a young age realize that there are options available to them and what that might mean, lifestyle, income, participation in the community, whatever it may be, that opportunity to really talk more deeply about it. That's a policy that we should pursue. There are incentives that I'd like to revisit with the legislature, something that's smart, that truly does incentivize a business to open and hire here or expand and hire here. we've had some successful ones. We've had some ones that were a little bit embarrassing over the years, but we shouldn't abandon them. Would like to have an opportunity to have that conversation. It hasn't been visited for a couple of years now, so I think it's overdue.
Yeah, I agree with John. I think the counseling is the key. We need to make sure the people helping these students, one, that they have a caseload that's manageable, but two, that they also have the background to know how to advise them. I think a lot of counselors are already predisposed to say, okay, you have to go to a 4-year degree. And, we've always had these goals. So many people have a college degree by this point in time. But if you look, putting some resources into our technical campuses and our ISDs to making sure that you still have introductory courses in high school to even expose the student to. I know when I grew up, you had small machines, you had auto shop, you had wood shop, you had drafting, you had all these things that just don't exist in many schools anymore. And, if a student doesn't get that first exposure, they never have the ability to dream of what could be. And we need to make sure that we're giving them that first exposure.
Let me ask this question. I know we have a couple minutes left here. Both of you, obviously, Jim representing the chamber and John representing the manufacturers of the state. Which sectors of each of your memberships are going to probably have the most difficult time catching up with, again, where they were prior to COVID, and how would they keep themselves going forward and staying alive? Because I know we're seeing a lot of mom and pop places shut down and probably not come back. We're seeing some mid-sized firms obviously having some issues. We talked about supply chain being a big problem. I'm in the process of trying to buy a car and there's 4 cars on the lots. Clearly that's a problem for both of your memberships. I mean, what sectors do you see as kind of needing the biggest help or the biggest push to keep them and keep us going forward as an economy?
I think immediately the sector I hear the most from that's having the biggest trouble weathering the storm is the hospitality industry. Your restaurants, your hotels, travel, tourism. I think a lot of our other members, they have plans in place. They were coming through COVID. They're certainly looking different now, but they believe that there's a quicker turnaround. And again, it comes to talent. If you're up north, they're offering $18 an hour in signing bonuses to work at Subway and they can't get any takers. Yeah. You don't have enough people to staff the hotels and golf courses and all the recreational aspects of northern Michigan. And that's a real problem because there are people that, the tourism dollars are very flexible. If I live in Indiana and I can't get what I want in Michigan, I go to Wisconsin, I go around. We need to make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that talent pool is being pushed forward into jobs, because there are great jobs available and just not enough takers yet. I heard, stories over the last 2 weeks of job fairs, virtual job fairs, and more employers than people showing up for the job fair. You'd have 30 or 40 employers and 5 people show up.
Wow.
We've got to change that mindset because that's a huge part of our industry or of our state's economy, as we all know. And I think they're the ones that are struggling the most right now.
And I agree with Jim. It is hospitality, restaurants and so on, really struggling to get folks back. And there's a pent up demand. I see it when I go out, and there's just short of euphoria. People are, we've suffered a year where we're able to go out. I can't wait to get to a concert, but the services may not always be available because of workforce. And our members feel it, and of course, Jim's members that are in manufacturing, they're making a widget for a refrigerator or the table that's used in a restaurant, the bed that's at a hotel. So the weakness in that sector affects all the others. In manufacturing, our members are cautiously optimistic. The demand is up in almost every sector. It's just the workforce and supply chain that are causing concern. And then inflation, we're already starting to see inflation rise in the price of raw goods and fuel. And that'll start to hit the consumer very, very soon. But overall, they're confident. If there's an area that was a winner for Michigan during COVID, it was people that were making boats and golf clubs and outdoor recreational items. And I say that with a smile on my face, but it's true.
Yeah.
There were certain aspects of the economy that were booming because you couldn't go out. You could do things on your own, but you couldn't assemble like you might or travel like you used to. And so those are still seeing a strong year, but they're looking at some softening next year, as we return to normal, something getting back. But overall, we're good. It's just trying to keep the rest of the economy moving and opening.
I think we had the conversation about not letting a crisis go to waste. Hopefully that's true. Hopefully our elected leaders and the public in general just comes forward and said, hey, we came through this. Now we got to make sure everybody comes back stronger.
Well, you talk about the crisis and kind of the things that have happened as a result. One of the things that have happened is the states received quite a significant influx of federal dollars, which has really boosted our state budget considerably. As you think about policy to move forward with that helps with employment, employees and the sectors of the economy that have struggled, what would some of the recommendations you have for the dollars that have come in that have yet to be spent? Where would you recommend that they go so they get used to the greatest advantage possible? Because I figure in my lifetime we'll never see an influx of federal cash like that into our state coffers again. So how do we use these resources the wisest for our state?
I would say I'd like to use them. Our message been to the budget committees is whatever money that's coming in federally, treat it as one-time money. Don't create a long-term debt structure. Don't create an ongoing expense that's going to be a burden on future budgets. And let's put it in transportation. That's infrastructure. It's one of the areas where we know we have skilled workforce needs. We can train and bring people along. And it's the best, most efficient use of taxpayer dollars. Let's improve the infrastructure systems that we all need to move our people and products around the state and use it wisely. It's a problem that's been ignored for far too long. And I think this is a perfect time to utilize those funds, because what people can't come to believe is somehow this money is free. So we need to use it wisely and efficiently for the taxpayer. We're all paying for that money somewhere. It may have come from the federal government appropriations process, but we're all going to pay for that. So let's make sure it's done smartly, and whether it's infrastructure on roads and bridges, or what do some of our schools need, technology and upgrades there that are one-time expenses that we can really have an impactful and meaningful benefit.
Yep, I agree with all of that. And the Chamber, the MMA, SBAM, BLM, and the Lansing, Grand Rapids, and Detroit regional chambers, we all signed a letter together encouraging 5-6 principles. And they fell along the lines of what Jim just described: long-term thinking, not long-term spending. Make sure it has a long-term impact, but not something that's going to create that debt for the future. And I think the budget office has been doing a pretty nice job coming up with very good ideas. My conversations with legislators tend largely to be bigger schemes than smaller. But I do worry a little about, everybody thinks, okay, it's 17 billion. If I just ask Senator so-and-so for $1 million, I should be good. And I think it was Jim Thomas. I think it was Jim. He and I were talking. He said, "Yeah, I must have about 10,000 $1 million requests." So it's think big, think long term. Infrastructure investments. The rules are becoming a little more tight on where you can spend it on infrastructure, because the Biden administration is still hoping to get a large infrastructure package. But still, if you improve IT for state office buildings, for schools, you take on finally, you have the resources to take on a court system that has an IT system. It's unyieldly. It's so, and there's a cost to that for businesses and citizens when the IT is not working effectively. Right. Air-conditioned schools so that we can get to a year-round calendar. Those are the kinds of investments that I would think about.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We're at the 30-minute mark almost here, but any final thoughts before we close out? I'll throw it to Jim first, and again, just quickly, final thoughts on how you see, or what you think you should see going forward.
We're optimistic. I'm optimistic. Our members are, like John has said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel here, and it looks like many sectors are going to move forward. We just have to make sure we're diligent in pushing the process the right way, breaking down some of these political and partisan barriers to have a real conversation, because we have an opportunity now. The money is there on the budget side. We need to have the wherewithal to make sure that we're putting policies in place so it can be spent efficiently for taxpayers. and in the long-term interest of the state. The old saying, the rising tide floats all boats, I think could really apply here. We need to make sure we stay focused on what's best for the state moving forward, but we are optimistic.
And I indicated we're optimistic as well, and we'll keep working. And while both Jim and I hope for consistency of messaging from our legislators and from the administration, I'll tell you in no uncertain terms, the Chamber and the MMA and the other organizations that I've mentioned, we've been standing very tight together. Where we think it's appropriate, we speak together, because if we're going to ask for clarity from our legislators, we owe them our clarity. And there are so many things that we have, sometimes overlapping memberships, but sometimes very different memberships. I have the luxury of worrying about a single sector, but our sector is affected by every other sector. When we sit down with the CEOs, and Jim, I look forward to you joining our I think we're doing bi-weekly calls now instead of weekly calls, but having the opportunity to chat about what's going on. Sometimes we just say we're good, but other times we come up with a plan and put our teams together. And I think that's been very, very helpful in our legislative success for our job creators moving forward. So glad to be part of this. Glad to see you all. I started a year ago and had this vision. I was so happy to be back in Lansing. Love my job. And then COVID happened and I couldn't see everybody.
Right.
So each of you are going to get a text from me suggesting lunch one of these days, because we haven't done that.
We welcome
Good.
it.
I really look forward to it.
We do welcome it.
I miss you being up here, John. I truly do.
Now, and we appreciate, Stephanie, you and Ron putting these together. These are tremendous to have this type of podcast and this kind of conversation. I know the Chamber, we work well with your firm. You do a tremendous job for your clients, and infrastructure and aggregates and a lot of issues we can work together on. And I think people don't get to see that. They don't see behind the curtain what a lobbying firm does and what an association like John's does or the Chamber here. There's a lot of good work going on, and I just don't want the public to be dispirited. There are always challenges, but we're still the greatest country in the world. This is a tremendous state, and I still think we have a tremendous upside if we all just stay focused.
Absolutely.
Very well said.
And I think that cannot get any better. So with that, gentlemen, thank you very, very much. And likewise, we do appreciate your time, your efforts, and working with you on numerous issues. We want to continue that. And again, we appreciate your perspective, your insights. And with that, I want to say thank you very much, and onward and upward.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining A Key to the Inside, the KJL podcast.